And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. Tonight's speaker is Doug C. of Fresno with 17 years clean.
Hello, family. I'm an addict named Doug.
Hey, Doug.
So how long do we have here?
Till 8:30.
Oh, no, that's not going to be long enough. You know the speakers that get up and they somewhere through their share, they stop and they ask, well, how long do I have? I'm not that speaker. You're here for the duration. Let me tell you a story. I was born a few years after the end of World War II. My parents immigrated. Took me and went to India, the subcontinent. They ended up in Calcutta. And I was that kid as a youngster. I liked to go out there, maybe some of you did. I liked to spin. When I was a kid, I didn't know what it was all about. I just liked it. I find out as an adult when I'm studying psychology in college, I'm finding out it's creating an altered state of consciousness. So as a little kid, and I'm not the only one, you see kids doing that, I'd spin until I'd get dizzy, and what I was doing is I was altering my state of consciousness. I was later to be revealed to me that this was just part of what was going on, because my understanding is that of NA, that those of you that are like me that suffer from the disease of addiction, in NA we believe that it's a medical problem, and at least in part, it's the way we're wired up from the factory. So there I was, a little kid wandering around on the streets of Calcutta, and being that kind of kid, it didn't take long before I was off on my own. Now I knew what I was doing, my parents didn't know what I was doing, and they lost me. So there I am in Calcutta, back at the end of World War II, wandering loose as a little kid with no local language. You know, all I got going is this addict mentality. I hadn't started using yet, but I like to spin. I like being adventurous and going off and doing stuff that, maybe I shouldn't have been doing. What I didn't realize is that that was not the cool thing to do, because number one, I had no street smarts, and number two, I didn't understand that there were human traffickers in India, and they specialized going out and stealing kids. And so a little white boy wandering around the streets of Calcutta, they had no problem grabbing me up and taking me away. First it was kind of scary, but I quickly settled down because they took care of me. I wasn't the only kid. They gathered up all the kids they could, right? I didn't know what was going on. They give us American-style cereal. We thought, well, this is cool. Next thing we know is they're letting us play video games all the time. And then they start giving us opium, pure opium, to smoke. And so that's where my addiction jumped off. What I didn't know is they were getting us ready to sell us. So a lot of the kids, they got sold, off to people that wanted to use them in a household or otherwise, maybe to assault them somewhere. I was in a group of kids, we got sold to the local industry people, the local, factory managers. And so I ended up as a little kid, I ended up in Calcutta in this big ass factory where all we did is we took cotton and we made it into yarn, and then we'd put it on a loom and we'd weave it back and forth, and we'd make cotton jersey, which we'd turn into t-shirts. And we'd watch these t-shirts get silk screened, and most of them had these NA logos on them, and they get sent back to the United States and used for NA fundraisers. And that was my first contact with NA. Now, wasn't that a great story? See, because we do that as addicts, right? We come up with these stories for what we're doing. And the fact of the matter is, it wasn't anything like that. No. I was just a middle-class white kid that grew up in Central California, in a middle-class environment. I didn't really want for anything. I wasn't in the hood, right? My parents didn't really abuse me. They were just neurotic. They were people back in the 50s, white people in the 50s, drank their martinis and were neurotic as hell. But as far as, I didn't go without. I went to a decent school. And I got loaded, and here I am. In spite of all of that, I got loaded, and here I am. And the fact of the matter is, my understanding of what was going on, it was just a matter of time that I was going to activate my addiction, because my understanding was I was an addict all along, and it just needed to be fired up. When that happened, my life started changing. And it's been changing ever since. When I tell that little story at the front end, it's, I tell people sometimes that that's the only funny thing you're going to hear from me, because people tell me all the time, especially in NA service, that I'm never, I haven't got any humor. I'm always serious. They're going on, oh yeah, Doug, you're always serious. So I tell that little effort at being funny. But lady, we know Heidi in NA, and maybe some of you know her. She heard that one day from me, and she says, Doug, that's not true. You're a funny guy. We're laughing at you all the time. There you go. I find that a little humor helps us get through this. And it's tough. It's tough for us. We've got a lot of challenges that we have to meet. Growing up, I didn't have any idea what addiction was about. When I was a kid, I watched my parents. I'd stay up and I'd sneak out late at night when they'd have parties at the house, and I'd watch them smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol, and I just thought that was too cool. Staying up late and doing this partying stuff, and of course you get around those cigarette butts of when you're a little kid, and then eventually you get up there and you sneak a little taste out of the leftover cocktails that people got. The cigarettes, that's nasty stuff. That alcohol, even the watered down stuff with the melted ice in there, sitting in that glass that somebody left there. It doesn't taste. There's nothing nice about that stuff. But I'm going to do it anyway, because it's something that's just really appealing to me, and not the least of it is it's something I'm not supposed to be doing. And I'm going to find that's going to be a recurring theme in my life, is I'm going to have a tendency to take risks, because you know what? I like being on the edge. In recovery, I have to be careful of that and keep it modulated about getting out there in situations where I get on the edge. I had a lot of situations where I was out there in places where you might have had to be because you didn't have a choice. I had a choice, and I put myself there because I'd get on the edge. So I was out in the street sometimes when I really had no business being there, and I didn't need to be there, and I'd get out there because of that edge that goes on. Some of you know what I'm talking about, that edge that comes on the street. So I have to be careful of that. NA is real clear. NA is a program to help addicts like me, and maybe you, with the disease of addiction, and specifically the focus is on drugs. And we're talking about every drug there is, anything that changes our perception of reality, anything that gets us changing our mood or altering our state of consciousness. That's what NA is there for. But in our literature, for example, this one, it talks about the idea that some of us, as we go down the road of recovery, we start to find out that addiction plays out in a lot of different areas in our life. As a kid, my first contact with getting loaded was when a family went to Disneyland when I was about maybe 8 years old. And, it was very exciting, and my brother and I were all hyperactive at the end of the day. So we're down at a motel. My parents are there, my brother and I, we don't want to go to sleep. We're in bed, we don't want to go to sleep. So what does Mom do? A middle-class white housewife. She gives us one of her sleeping pills. Wow. Wasn't that great? That was as good as an e-ticket ride at Disneyland that whole day. So I really liked that, changing my state of consciousness, altering my state of consciousness. The next thing I did is when I was about 14 years old, as far as I'm concerned, a gateway drug for me was cigarettes. Was hanging out with some kids that were kids of the friends of my dad. We were at a business meeting over in Santa Cruz. These kids were all hanging out together, and some of these kids were a little bit wilder than I were because they had cigarettes, and we'd go sneak cigarettes. Well, any of you that ever smoked cigarettes, that first one you smoke, I'm here to tell you, there's nothing nice about that stuff. But you know what? I smoked my second one, and my third one. And principally, looking back, it was about the fact that I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. And it was worthwhile enough to overcome that nastiness of it. You know, in recovery, I'm one of those people in recovery that as I started down recovery, I started finding out that changes in my life were going to go way beyond just addiction to drugs. That, in fact, I quit smoking. So I haven't smoked for a long time. I personally find that stuff very addicting also. But that behavior in my life had to go. You know, if that's a situation for you, you know, you're on your own to figure out your own way. Narcotics Anonymous talks about that to start recovery, we have to get clean. You can't have recovery in Narcotics Anonymous unless you're clean. That's what our literature says. And then we can start that process. So there I was doing things because it was a thrill. I was starting to do things to alter my state. And you know what? I was a child of the 60s. And that meant it was all about drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And so, man, I was on. That was great. And I was smart enough as a kid that I would actually go out and research other drugs that I might use to change myself. You know, kids back in the 60s, in the beginning of the 60s, the thing was alcohol. That's really what was going on. The idea of marijuana, that was still back in the days where it was demon marijuana. And even the kids that were troublemakers didn't partake of it. I remember my dad taking me one day on a Saturday. He took me in his truck, his work truck. And as he was driving around with me that day, taking care of things on a Saturday morning, he has one of his very rare conversations with me. And it goes something like this. He's a man of few words, much in the style of John Wayne. And so what he says is, you know, I've done a lot of things in my life, and there's a lot of it that I'm not very proud of. But the one thing that I've never done is I've never smoked any of that marijuana. And I thought, wow, Dad, I didn't say it. I thought, man, you're a little late. That train already rolled down to the station. I'd been drinking. I'd been binge drinking on the weekends. I got hooked up with marijuana, and it was on. Now, I've always thought of marijuana as kind of, you know, God's gift to mankind in terms of a precious herb. I'm very Jamaican in that respect. But you know what? I got around narcotics, and I thought, well, you know, what's the big deal with marijuana? But unfortunately for me, the starting reality is I got around NA, and I've heard people in NA then share experiences where their life was as trashed as anybody else's simply on marijuana. So what I had to do is I started listening to these shares. I had to start changing my perceptions of what was going on. And no matter what my personal opinion is, I've had to embrace the idea that in Narcotics Anonymous, if I'm going to do this program, I'm going to do it by being abstinent from all substances that change my thinking and alter my mood. And so that's what I do today. I don't take anything. We had the readings tonight, and see, for a guy like me with a hard head, it's good to hear those readings over and over again. 17 years of it. Actually 27, but 17 years listening to these readings, telling me the same thing. What do I have to do to not get loaded? Not take that first drug. Well, for me, the first drug was a long time ago. For me, that's really about taking the next drug, because you know what? That's the other thing I've learned is I'm not bulletproof. There's nothing between me and getting loaded. Nothing. Except me practicing what I've learned in here. Working the steps, doing a program, and following through on the things that I've learned from others that work for them. And I got a bunch of that stuff. It's in an imaginary backpack of recovery tools that I carry with me everywhere. And I've been carrying them for a couple decades now, and so far, every day, they've worked for me for one more day. So one of those tools is, no matter what, I just don't use. It's not necessarily easy. It's not that I'm completely without desire. You know that part of the message where an addict, any addict like myself and maybe you, can stop using and then lose the desire and then find a new way of life. That lose the desire, I find, can come and go. Now I'm here to tell you, in my experience, my personal experience, getting more time, it becomes easier. I can remember back, maybe you can too, where just for today, a whole day, that wasn't happening. I couldn't imagine going 15 minutes. Couldn't imagine making it 15 minutes without getting lit up. You know, it was a struggle to make 5 minutes. But you know what? I did it. One of my friends in NA service from back east, he said to me one time, he said, Doug, he said, I used to go to my doctor. My doctor knew I was an addict, a practicing addict. The doctor would tell me stories, and I didn't understand what he was talking about. So my friend would say, his doctor would tell him these stories about the Civil War, about the terrible, terrible carnage that would happen on the battlefield. Guys would be out there fighting each other, and they would get these just horrific wounds. And then when the medical treatment was done, it was verging right on butchery. A lot of times they wouldn't have any anesthetic. They couldn't kill the plaint. They didn't even have any alcohol to get you drunk. They would, they'd take saws, just regular saws, and saw off your limbs that couldn't be changed. He said his doctor would tell him about in the Middle War, in the Civil War, in the battlefield medical practices. Sometimes the doctor would have to have you hold your entrails in while he tried to sew you back up. My friend said, I never understood why he was telling me these stories. And he says, well, then years later when I got clean, then I started understanding. My doctor was explaining to me that human beings can go through an incredible amount of pain and suffering. And it's possible to move on through that. So those of us that are struggling on trying to get clean, there's plenty of people in NA that know how it is, know exactly what you're going through, and probably worse. And you could do it. I'm not sure how I got clean, but I did it. I don't want to go back and test it again. I don't want to go there at all. I don't want to try it out. But I can remember that. I can remember not being able to consider, I couldn't conceive of being able to go 5 minutes. But somehow I did, and I got a little more time. And I got a little more time, and I didn't take that next drug, and I got a little more time, and it added up. But I wasn't looking to keep it. When I came around NA, I really wasn't looking for what you guys had to offer. A lot of addicts walk through the door. They're suffering, they're struggling, but they really do want a different life. I wasn't that addict. I came around because I wanted to go back out and get loaded. What happened to me is I started using. I went through high school. We drank a lot. We did other dope when we could get it. As more stuff became available, I'd try it out. I'd actually sit down and do library research to see what other kind of things I could get into. And so I thought I was just a hard partying guy. I got into my 20s, and the party was on. I went off to the university, and I partied my way right out of the university. I went on a ski trip, got drunk, got thrown in jail while everybody else was skiing. I sat in jail until the bus came and picked me up, took me back to college. When the dean of students found out about it, and I called me in and said that I needed a rest, and I was out. And it's kind of like I copped an attitude, and so, okay, more time to party. So I went through my 20s partying, and I thought I was a hard partying guy. Well, what happened to me was that was back in the days before Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And for me, what happened is that I got thrown in jail up there at a ski trip. And then in my 20s, I got my first DUI. I got pulled over, got thrown in jail because I was drunk, driving a car. So it happened. So there I am in jail, drunk. Okay, well, it happens. And back then, you know, it wasn't the big deal that it is today. So it was a different experience for me. Well, you know what our readings say is this is a progressive disease. So what happens is like, at that point, I'm doing, let's make a deal, God. Get me out of this one, and I won't ever do that again. And of course, you know how that ends up. You know, we get over that deal, and it's like, okay, God, I'm good for now. I'll just go off on my own, and you can take care of the next poor soul that needs you. And so then, after a while, bam, I get another DUI. You know, and now I'm all serious, and I'm going to change things around. This is not going to happen again. And of course, it's a progressive disease. And a few years later, it happens again. I come to laying on my back in a drunk tank in another county jail, looking up at the ceiling. And as I come to, I think to myself, well, I don't really think I have a problem with alcohol, but this is certainly getting to be a problem with law enforcement, and I got to do something different. And so I surrendered to the idea that I would go to AA. Now, I didn't really think that I was an alcoholic, but I went to the AA and I said the words that I was an alcoholic. I explained to my dad that, well, I didn't really think it was true, but I had to do something. And I thought, you know, it can't hurt in court and whatnot. So I spent the next 10 years around AA. I decided what I'd do. I decided that, you know what, alcohol wasn't working. I was having a problem with alcohol because I didn't know a thing about being an addict. I thought that it was really a case of this was an alcohol problem. See, I'd heard those things about alcohol and drugs. Just out in society, I'd heard that. And it made sense to me that, you know, there's drugs over here, and I knew about some of them because I did some of them. But for me, it was the alcohol was the problem. That was getting my butt in jail. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to surrender to this. I go to AA. You know what? God bless those people and their pickled livers. They helped me stop drinking alcohol. And I did that for 10 years. I did a righteous program of sobriety, at least in my world. Now, the problem with that is I was the guy that actually heard it when somebody says alcohol and drugs, sober and clean. When you say all those things, it sounds like stuttering to me, but back in the day what happened is that just reinforced this idea to me that drugs were somehow way different than alcohol. And so that made a lot of sense to me, and I thought that I could really do this thing, that if I did this righteous program of sobriety, that would be okay, because I only had a problem with alcohol, because nobody had said in any of those meetings I was in. Now, I understand some of you maybe go over to the other fellowship and you talk about getting good recovery and good fellowship, and you know, and I get told that there are different things that are talked about, but that's never been my experience. For the 10 years that I went to AA, never once, not one time, did I hear people talking about addiction. In fact, quite to the contrary. It was not considered good etiquette. And since then, I don't go there that very often at all. I go to mostly NA meetings, really, for year after year. So at that time, I didn't know a darn thing about addiction. Nobody was talking about it. Didn't get any information about it. So it made sense to me that there was two problems going on, or maybe more. Well, I thought I was doing this righteous program of sobriety, and in the meantime, I found a secondary benefit. By cutting out the alcohol, it made my drug experience that much better. Getting loaded was way better if you're not drunk. So there I was. I was out running with people just like you. I'm out there on the street. I'm getting loaded, but I'm not drinking, and I'm pretty righteous about it. So when we're out there and we're waiting for the dealer man to show up to give us our stuff, sometimes how you get on the edge. So maybe you'll go and knock down a 40, take the edge off, pass something around, get a bottle. I would never participate in that because I was doing a righteous program of sobriety. And I was all righteous about it. No, I want to do it. I'll just wait. And then we get the real dope, then I'd partake of that. And of course, being a good addict, I'd do any of the dope. Whether I got the stuff that I thought that I wanted or not, I'd do it. And of course, being an addict, if I could work you out of yours, that'd be good too. But nobody was talking about that stuff, at least that I was hearing. So again, the idea that it was a progressive disease snuck up on me, and once again the joke was on me. Because what happened is I kept using, even though I was doing this righteous program of sobriety, I kept using. And the disease kept progressing. And the consequences started to build up. And I was out there, remember the part where I said about being on the edge? I was out there doing stuff that I didn't need to do. And then it got to the point with staying up with the dope where I did start need to do stuff to keep the dope coming. So a two-pronged process was going on where I was out there starting to get involved in crime because of an edge to it, and the second part of it was, it was bringing money in that you need for that increasing dope habit. So now I'm out there thinking that I'm some kind of outlaw on the run, ripping, robbing, riding, getting loaded, hard partying, because I'm not an addict. I'm a hard partying guy that's out there living like an outlaw. Well, again, the joke was on me. I was to come to find out I wasn't any outlaw. What I was a criminal nuisance. And I became such a criminal nuisance that eventually I got arrested, not once, but multiple times. And it wasn't because of alcohol, because, supposedly I'm sober the whole time. But I'm getting loaded, and it's a progressive disease. And it's sneaking up on my backside, kicking me in the butt, and I don't realize what's going on. And so the consequences start loading down on me. And the next thing I know, I'm deep off into the legal system now. So here I am, middle-class white guy. I'm middle-aged now. Been doing this for 20, 30 years. And I'm middle-aged, and I start having serious legal cases. I mean, serious, like this is now starting to get into felony cases. So there I am. I end up in a superior court in California, and of course, after I get busted, I'm smart enough, and I'm a middle-class white guy, so I can get myself when I go into court. I'm deep off into disease, don't realize what's going on, but I'm smart enough to know that I need to clean up to go to court. So I walk into court that morning, and I got on my slacks, I got my preppy shoes on, got my preppy shirt, preppy sweater over the preppy shirt. I'm all cleaned up. I don't have the pigtail at the time. I walk into court, and here's all these people waiting for the judge, and they're looking a lot like us, right? They're laid back there. Some of them look like they've had a bad several nights in a row, maybe weeks in a row, and they're slouching and looking surly and like bad. Yeah, dude, I'm bad. You don't want to sit next to me because I'm bad. And here I walk in all preppy, right? And I sit down, and so they start calling cases, and these people are in there because homie beat up his wife, and this guy did this, and this guy stole some hubcaps, and they call my case, and they start listing off all the drugs that I've got on me when the cop takes me down, the weapons I've got, and it just goes down this list, because you know how the prosecutors do. They charge you with everything that they can find, and they go down this list, and as I turn around and walk out of the court, because it's just an arraignment, right? I get to leave. As I walk out, I see all these bad dudes in the audience kind of looking at me like, what is that all about? Well, what it was about is another addict. It didn't make any difference, how you looked or where you think you came from. You know, that's where we just start getting this idea of unity in NA. Is it doesn't make any difference. I may have grown up in the hood with you. We may have not have shared the same dope. You know what? But we start understanding at some point that there's two parts to NA unity. The first one is that if you're here because you're an addict, then we share that. We share that experience no matter who we are, where we did it, and what we did it about. We share that in unity. The second part is even more important. If you're here like me, then you're here because you're seeking recovery. Whether it's working for you yet, you're still here seeking it. I may have had bad reasons to be there in my first meeting. I may not have been sincere, but I was still seeking recovery. And that's the real powerful part, second part of NA unity. So, I didn't know any of that stuff. And so now I'm caught up in the legal system. And of course, being an addict, I can't learn from what I'm doing. So I keep pushing it. And while I've got one case going, I managed to get myself arrested on additional cases. You know what? And they eventually, what they did is they revoked my bond. Originally, they let me out on my own. And then they figured out they needed to get some bond in there. And then finally, they just said, no, you're staying. And what happened is eventually, I went before a Superior Court judge, and he was so serious about me being a nuisance that the original case was the prosecutor wanted to put me into state penitentiary. First time, put me in a state penitentiary for 8 years. My attorney got it down to intermediate term, 3 years, 8 months, something like that. And then the judge did something that I'm told that he was not favorably disposed to do. In other words, most of the time he would not give you the second part of the sentence. And with me, he made an exception. He gave me the choice of going into enforced treatment. And I thought, oh, that's got to be better than doing straight time. And so I said I'd take it. So I went off to Hotel California. You know when the Eagles sing about that in the song? They're talking about the California Rehabilitation Center down in Norco, California. So Don Henley from the Eagles, Rick James and I, we all graduated from the same place. Not at the same time, but the same place. And when the Eagles sang that song, they were singing about the place where Henley had done time, California Rehabilitation Center. It's not a rehabilitation center. It's a level 2 state of California penitentiary. It's a treatment program. You've got to go through treatment. It's mandatory. But you know what? It's not a treatment program per se, because there's guys on guard towers in khakis with carbines, and they will shoot you off the fence if you try to leave the treatment program. Now, I don't know any Salvation Army program where you get shot for doing a walkaway. So I was in there doing time. The guy that trimmed my beard up, because by that time I had a full beard, I was going to do time. So I got my hair's long, I got a beard, and I get my beard trimmed. The guy, my barber, he's not an addict. What he is a good enough marksman that he shoots his wife and her lover boy when he finds them together. So he's doing double terms for murder. And he happened to be a barber when he was out there on the street, so he's doing barbering on the inside. That was my barber who trimmed my beard. So my point is I was there with the real dudes. This wasn't just a treatment center. See, I was too clever to do a treatment program, a regular treatment program. I had to keep doing what I was doing over and over again until I finally just got slammed away. First time out, the real deal. And why? Well, looking back, is because I didn't have any control over what I was doing. I thought I did. At the time, I thought I was doing what I wanted to do. I thought I was in control. I thought I was making decisions. And you know who was in control. It was the disease of addiction. And part of that disease is the ability for me to live in a land of denial and not understand. Now, part of it was ignorance. I didn't know any better because I didn't have the likes of you explaining to me in meetings about addiction. I'd heard plenty about drinking and about being sober, But I hadn't heard anybody talk about that it doesn't make any difference what the substance is. It's the underlying disease of addiction. And if you keep it up, it's going to get worse and just keep going. So I was in the grip of the disease of addiction. I was suffering consequences, and I was not in control of what I was doing. I just had the illusion of control, that I was making decisions and doing what I wanted. But I wasn't. Looking back, clearly I wasn't. You know, and my thinking had become so screwed up between the addiction combined with, and I have to give it up today, I like to think that I'm the kind of independent guy that does what I damn well please. I think for myself, I make my own decisions. But looking back, you know, I have to give it up. I was influenced by the people I was around. That's not comfortable for me to admit. But the fact of the matter is, in NA, when they tell you the suggestion's made to hang with the winners, you know what? My experience is that's good advice. Out on the street, I wasn't hanging with the winners, and I was influenced by who I was with, combined with the fact that the disease of addiction was in the driver's seat in my life. And so there I was. I was out of it. I did not really know what was going on. I had the illusion of it. I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. My life had become a hollow shell in terms of I was soulless. You know how it happens with the active disease of addiction. We don't care about anybody else because all we can take care of is feeding the disease of addiction. So there was nothing left for me, so I'd use everyone around me. I look back on that, you know, and it's a damn shame. I'm not happy about that. But one thing that I take comfort in today that maybe will help some of you is, I think about the fact that, you know what, I didn't know any better. It's not right what I did, but the fact of the matter is there's a big difference from me doing it back then when I didn't know any better and me doing it today. So if I go out there and act in that way with callous disregard to other human beings, today when I'm clean and I've got some recovery and I've worked some steps and I've been influenced by you guys and what your experience has been, you know, that's on me in my world. So that's another reason for not taking that next drug, because you tell me what will happen when I go out and take that next drug. What you shared with me when you come back in after doing that yourself is that a disease takes off right where it was. Well, that's a frightening thought. 17 years later, have my disease fire right back up where it was and then go romping off from there? Well, that's going to be really exciting. And what's the positive side of it? You check it out. You tell me what your experience has been. I have not heard one single time in the last 27 years. Now, what I'm doing is I'm counting the 17 years that I've been around Narcotics Anonymous, plus the 10 years of sobriety over at AA. Because remember, liquor has not touched my lips, as my grandmother, the Baptist, used to say. You know, what's the first step in AA? Powerless over alcohol. What's the third tradition in AA? A desire to stop drinking. Right? I did that. I spent 10 years around AA. No drinking. Desire to stop drinking. And then 17 years over here. And you know what? I've not heard a story in either place in the last 27 years where somebody went out and relapsed, comes back in, and then shares, God, that was good. I spent all weekend getting loaded. And it was good. I can't believe that I spent all that time clean without getting loaded. It was good. Have you heard anything like that? Not once. I've never heard anything like that. I hear us coming back in bemoaning the fact that, you know, can't have an arm full of dope and a head full of NA. Right? I've heard people come back in here and talk about it takes right back off where I stopped. And there was nothing nice about it. I had one kid, in 2 weeks period of time, he fired up, and in 2 weeks' time he lost everything that he had built up. Everything. House, wife, 2 cars, bunch of other stuff. 2 weeks, right? Usually it takes longer, but the point is, you guys know as well as I what happens when when one of us goes out there and thinks we'll do it over again. Well, you know, if you do and you come back, because I know a lot of us do that, God bless you. And I personally try to make it part of my program to go up and make a personal thank you to members who come back in and share about going back out, because every time I hear that, I take it personal. It's a reminder to me that that could be me. That's what kept me from going out. I came in here, when I paroled out of the penitentiary, I came to an NA meeting simply because I wanted to get loaded. And I was smart enough that I watched what happened to us in the penitentiary. Any of you that have been there, or your homeboys have been there, your homegirls, what we do is we get out, we get loaded, we get violated, and we go back. And then we do it over again. And we do it again, and we do it again, and we do it again. And it's like a revolving door. Like a revolving door, and we never get out of that door. We get old, and eventually we get out, or somebody intervenes in some way, maybe we get out, but it's not pretty. Well, I was smart enough to watch that stuff. I'm in the chow hall one morning. It's a Monday morning. I'm in the chow hall in the penitentiary. And so what? Across the room, I see homeboy. He's a youngster. And I'm surprised to see him. I walk over after chow, and I say to him, homeboy, I thought you were ready to parole out. And he goes, oh, yeah, I did Friday. You know, he didn't make it out of town. You know, he goes up to the bus station or the air terminal or wherever it was. He's got his gate money. And, of course, the dope dealers all see us coming out. They know when the release dates are. And they come and hook us up. And most of us, we break week. We get loaded because we're addicts in the grip of an active addiction, right? Even though we're not using. Even though we did that whole program without using. Because that's one of the things you had to do to get out, is you had to produce evidence that you were clean. You could use, if you've been there, you know, sometimes it's easier to get dope on the inside than it is out on the street. But you know what? You're running a risk that you're going to do a lot of extra time if you get violated in one of those programs. See, this isn't the regular penitentiary where they give you a little write-up and add a few days to your program. This is a major problem where they recycle you. And I wanted out. I wanted out because I was in active addiction and I wanted to get loaded. Now, I didn't think it was addiction because one of the proofs to me was the fact that I could go for a period of time without getting loaded. Now, what would you say to somebody who says, I'm not an addict because I can go. I've gone a month at a time without using. I've gone 6 months without using. Well, what I was to find out when I got around here was, we do that. We can not use for a long time and then get loaded again. Guess what? We can move away from the problem and we take it with us. We can get rid of the family because they're making it happen, right? And then we surround ourselves with a new group of people that get into the same dynamic. And we just repeat it over and over again. So what happened to me is I came around to meetings of Narcotics Anonymous. Jason was there. Jason was in the meeting on the outside the night after I paroled. I paroled on a Saturday, and I went to my first regular outside meeting the next night, Sunday, at the blood bank in Fresno. It was the Crossroads group of Narcotics Anonymous. It's my home group today. They're meeting right now. They may or may not be getting finished right now. But that's my home group. That's the first one I went to, and Jason was sitting in the room when I walked in the door. I'd paroled out of prison the night before. What I was trying to do was, I didn't want what you guys had to offer. I wanted to look good to a parole officer, an agent, so I could get out from under the state's thumb quicker, so I could get loaded without getting caught up. So I'd clear parole, look good. So I thought I wasn't required to go to any meetings. I didn't have to go to AA, NA, anything, right? All I had to do was stay clean, stay out of trouble, and do my time on parole, and they'd sign me off, and then I could go out and start my rampage again, because I thought I owed it to myself. That's what I was going to do. That's what I was completely focused on, is going back out. Well, I came around, I started coming to meetings. The only thing I can really take credit for is I came back. Jason, I guess today it's probably different, but back in the day, man, he could share. He'd go on and on. I used to sit there in a meeting and go, oh my God, please make him stop. And he wasn't alone. There were four of them. There were four of them with first names that started with J. And every meeting, every damn meeting, all four of them would share, and they'd go on. It was like they were competing with themselves on who could share the longest. And they'd go on and on. So I'd sit there and I think, oh, this is crazy. The other thing I thought was, all that you talk about this literature, I think, you fools are addicted to literature. And I didn't want to know you. I didn't want you touching me. I didn't want you hugging me. And you came up and did it anyway. Kept telling me to come back. And I did. That's the only thing I came clear for is for bad reasons. I kept coming back. And what happened is there came a day, sometime down the road, when I decided on that day I was going to go out and relapse. Except to me it wasn't a relapse. It was I was going to start my rampage again. So I was going to go out. I was ready to go. I was fit. I was in good shape. I had some money. Having done some time, you learn a few things. I knew more about what was going on. Had some good hookups, frankly. And so I was going to go. That day I was going to go. And you know what? I had a job. I went to my job. I took care of business, and then I was going to go out, and I didn't. And I kind of hung around. And I didn't go out. It got later in the day. It got to be late afternoon. And I thought to myself, oh man, I'm not going to go out on a run right now. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it going tomorrow morning early, get started early. That'll be a lot better than going out now. And so I thought, well, I'll get something to eat. I'll get rested up and it'll be better. And then you know what I did that night? I went to another NA meeting. I thought, what the hell? I'm not on a rampage. I might as well go to a meeting. So I went to another NA meeting. Probably Jason was there. He went to meetings all the time. It's hard not to run into Jason. So I went to another meeting. And the next day I was going to get up in the morning and go on my rampage, and I didn't. And later in the day I kind of had the same process again. It's late in the day. This is not working out. I can do it tomorrow. It'll be okay. And guess what? I went to another meeting that night. I did this for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, and I had that moment of awareness that I go, oh, what the hell's going on? I'm going to have a talk with myself. And I'm going, self, what are you doing? You're going to get loaded and you're not doing it. And I realized what I was doing is I was dragging my feet. I was procrastinating. I was staying clean through procrastination. And what was really going on when I thought really hard about it was the message you were sharing with me was getting to me. What you were sharing to me was that I wasn't going to be any different. That when I went out there and I got loaded one more time, that the same thing that happened to you and had happened to me was going to start up again. And whether I wanted to believe it or not, I'd heard enough of you share the same kind of story over and over again in my short time around NA, and you talking about addiction and how it works in our lives, that you know what? All of a sudden, Mr. Smart Guy was not so willing to go out there and try it one more time. And I just procrastinated myself into the start of serious abstinence. I'd been abstinent for a while. I had, a year or so clean at that point. But I hung on to it because, you know what? What you had shared with me was working on me. What I didn't realize when I was in that program down in Norco, I went to those H&I meetings. See, this is why when you take money out of your pocket and put it in a basket, it actually makes a difference in the world, because that money that goes in the basket ends up doing NA service. It pays your rent, maybe it buys you some coffee, but some of it actually goes into NA service. And what happens is, in my case, some of that money went to help support a hospitals and institution program where NA members just like you came into California Rehabilitation Center and talked to guys just like me about addiction. And even though I didn't think I was listening to it, the fact of the matter is they were planting the seeds of recovery in my heart, in my addict heart, in spite of myself. When I got out, I could look in the phone book. I knew where AA was, but I got out because the H&I program from NA had come into the prison and talked to me. I thought, what the hell, I'll try something different. I opened the telephone book, and guess what? And this was in Fresno, part of this area right here. So some of the money your guys, your predecessors put in, went to making sure there was a phone number in that phone book. Nowadays we got websites. They also had paid for a phone line. So I look up in the phone book, I call that number, and guess what? There's a phone answering system that tells me that on Sunday night there's a meeting, guess what? It's within walking distance. It's called the Crossroads Group. It's at 6:30 the next night, and I go there. So some of that money that you put in the basket helped support carrying the message to an addict like me. It helped make sure there was a phone line where I could find out where the meeting was. And when I went to the meeting, guess what? There were meeting schedules. And I could take one of those meeting schedules and find another meeting to go to where no doubt Jason was there, because guy goes to a lot of meetings. So what you contribute goes directly into carrying the message to an addict like me. And ultimately, it's life-saving work. When you contribute to NA through making a contribution in the basket, you're participating directly in life-saving work. You save lives. Anybody know addicts that have died behind a disease? Yeah, so you start talking amongst yourselves, and you can start stacking them up like cordwood. I'm guarantee you, the longer you're around here, the more names of dead addicts you're going to come in contact with. A few of them died clean. A lot of them died dirty. A lot of them died ugly. Real ugly ways. You know what? And it's behind a disease, and it's a damn shame. But our literature also talks about, some of us have to pass away for the rest of us to learn from. So when an addict relapses, that's a wake-up call to me. When an addict dies, that could be me. And it makes a difference. So when you guys contribute, it makes a difference in saving lives. So I really appreciate the life-saving work that you did that directly benefited me. Staying around here, I decided if I was really going to stay, that I really had to do it. This is one of our books. It's the 12 Concepts for NA Service. You heard people, maybe yourself, talk about work the steps, work the traditions, steps and traditions. We really need to say 3: steps, traditions, and concepts. The steps are principles for personal recovery. The traditions are principles for group behavior, like the Madera Unity Group and the Crossroads Group in Fresno. The concepts is principles for how we do our service in NA. So here's my little book. I keep it here with my It Works, How, and Why. And these steps. I've got a sponsor. I sponsor people. I work the steps. The first step to me, we're powerless over our addiction. I know some of us talk about powerlessness, and they go, I'm powerless this, I'm powerless that. This speaks to me directly. It's primarily about powerlessness over addiction. When I was out there using, I only had the illusion that I was in control. When I fire up my disease, if I go out and get loaded tonight, I will lose my power, because I've got the power not to take that next drug. That first step is important to me, to acknowledge that I'm in control of not taking that next drug. Who's in control once I take that drug? The disease of addiction. I only have the illusion that I'm in control. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I was not alone out there when I was using. I had a higher power with me the whole time. I have a higher power today, which I choose to call higher power. Now, my higher power actually has a name, but I don't use it, because you know what? We want to be a worldwide fellowship. We want to carry our life-saving message to addicts throughout the world, and not all of us addicts believe in the same thing. This may shock some of you, possibly offend you, but we have Satanists in NA. We have a lot of Wiccans, We have pagans. We have people that believe all the different major religions. So I'm concerned that if I start talking about any one of those specifically, there may be somebody in the room who will be offended in a way that will keep them from getting the message. So I try to keep my message real neutral in terms of what's important for me in the second step is, for this to work, I have to realize that Doug is not in control. Doug is not in control. And my life works a lot better when I surrender to the idea that there is a force around me that is way beyond me. Now for me it's real easy. I can walk outside anytime, day or night, but particularly it's nice at night when the stars are out. Because all I have to do is look and think about that and try to understand the magnitude, which I'm not going to be able to do. The magnitude of what's going on out there, and I'm a small part of this. And how could you possibly think, if you're clean and in your right mind, how can you consider that and not understand that we are not in control? So, getting myself out of the way all the time, and I have to do it over and over again, letting it go and letting forces beyond me, whether it's NA or the group or an actual deity or creator, whatever it is to you, if I get out of the way and let that happen, my life starts changing. When I get in the way, it interferes. Number 3, we made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Well, you know what? I'm simply not disturbed by the word God and Him, because there's a whole history to that. I just kind of don't worry about that stuff. The point is, I continually remake that decision to let go. Some of you say let go and let God. Me, it's just get your butt out of the way. Let it happen. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Making the inventory is like going into the warehouse. Boss says, go into the warehouse, write down everything that's there. Well, all of us think of, immediately we think of the bad stuff. Stuff we don't want anybody to know about. Stuff we're ashamed of. The sins. Well, that's not what it says. It takes a moral inventory. Moral means good and bad. So when we go take that inventory, it's important to me that I take an inventory on myself in terms of the good and the bad. And then, that's not the scary part to me. Number 5, we admitted to God ourselves and another human being the nature of our wrongs. This is scary to me a little bit because now I always had it in my head. I can try to pretend it's not there, but it's there. The scary part now is I have to hear myself saying it out loud. I have to let my higher power know about it out loud, and I have to let another human being. And you know what? There's a release that comes when I let that happen. When I walk through that. You know, the idea of fear, we're all fearful. Courage is not the lack of fear. You've heard it before? Courage is the ability to walk through fear, come out the other side. And whether it's a moral inventory or something else, being courageous means we walk through. And then where we end up is a place where in number 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. So I'm ready now. Not easy. We get used to all that stuff. It becomes part of us. And we find useful places for it. But you know what? When we go on to 7, we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. People say, well, it says in 6, defects of characters, and in 7 it says shortcomings. I've looked the words up. They mean the same thing. Just because one of the things about English is, it's a more interesting language because we change words. Instead of using the same word over and over again, we use different words meaning the same thing. Defects of character and shortcomings in most dictionaries define the same way. So what I was doing in 6 and 7, I actually asked for it to happen. Remove it. Now, how long does it take for the removal process? Who knows? It doesn't say anything here whether it's going to happen. I simply petition my higher power to do it. It may or may not happen. It's not my job to worry about it now. I move on. And in 8, I make a list of persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all. And of course, where cautions are given to us, when we read literature like this, that just going out and making those amends may not be the smartest thing in the world. You may go say things to people that may not be the best choice. Sometimes we need to explore other ways to make those amends than directly. Going to the police and giving up a list of all the crimes that I've ever committed is not going to happen.
Yeah.
I did my time for the gig. You know how it works. They tried to get me. They told me, they promised me that if I'd give it up, they wouldn't hold any against me. You know what? That's done. I'm moving on. I do other things in my life today to try to do a continuing amends for my criminal nuisances in life. All right? There's other things in my life where I'm not necessarily going to go up and disturb somebody's life by telling them something that they can quite happily live without knowing. There may be alternate ways to deal with it. Jason's got some clever stories about that. Other people do. Generally, a sponsor can be helpful on how to work those amends. This is a place where it's incredibly important to have a sponsor. But the fact of the matter is, our own literature says, before we start working the steps, we have to do a couple things. One thing, you got to be clean. And you maybe heard stories about addicts that were loaded and they claim they were working the steps. I'm here to tell you, our literature speaks to that. It doesn't happen that way. You got to be clean, and we're encouraged in NA clearly. The step working guide, if you read it in the preface, it says you can do the steps a lot of different ways. You can write, but you don't have to write. It says the one thing that you need to do is not work them alone. You really need to have a sponsor. That is the job number one for sponsorship in NA, is to guide somebody through the steps. It may become more. Jobs of sponsors may embrace more than the steps, but the steps is job number one. That's it. So when I get to 8, it's important that I talk to my sponsor. So when I get to 9, make direct amends, people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And that happens. 10, 11, and 12. This is the maintenance for me. I do these on a daily basis. This goes on in a continuous process of my life. We continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. And boy, do I do that. It's not necessarily instantly. Sometimes it takes me a day or two to think it through, but I've done it. I've done it person to person. I've done it in different situations. Being in service, I've done it in service several times where I've had to actually go in a public meeting and make an amends over something that I did that was really not something that I should have done. I take responsibility because the 10th step is part of my process of continuing maintenance. In number 11, we saw it through prayer and meditation. I pray, I ask for, and the meditation is where I listen. Everybody prays. Few of us actually listen for the answer. And it says here that the answer should be praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry it out. We don't. It's not about this make a deal. God, if you give me this, I'll do this. It's praying for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. So it's not about us. I do a lot of prayer and meditation. For me, I'm not the one who gets down on my knees, but I will sit and consider, I will consciously think about what I need from the cosmos, from my higher power. And then I'll meditate. I'll sit quietly and wait for the answer to come. Maybe it comes now, maybe it comes later, but I meditate on a regular basis. And in fact, you do too. Because meditation is something everybody does. It's not some strange Eastern process you do with orange robes on and incense burning and candles and whatnot. That's nice if you want it, but meditation is just whatever you're thinking about. And Americans meditate all the time. The 3 big things that Americans meditate on, according to meditators and psychologists, is sex, kids, and money. It'd be nice to add a 4th and meditate on the direction our lives need to take according to our higher powers. How tough can that be? Do 4 of them. Don't have to give up the sex, kids, and money, but add on instructions from higher power. Number 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, We tried to carry the message to addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Practice for me means I work on it. Doesn't mean I got it. So I'm not here tonight trying to tell you that I got this down. I'm struggling. I do this stuff. What have I learned from you? What are some of the tools in my backpack? Don't use, no matter what. Number one, I can't imagine a situation where I'd actually have to use. I've never been walking down the sidewalk, stumbled, and happened to fall on a syringe that was full of dope, and say later it's an accident. You know, when I hear people talk about relapse, I'll get up on them and I'll ask them, I said, how did they happen? He says, I don't know, my sponsor didn't call me back, my fish died, I stopped, whatever. And I go, that's not what I mean. I said, how do you get the dope in your body? Oh, I went to the Connect. I scored some stuff and I did it. Well, there it is. If I don't do that stuff, if I don't take it in, no matter how I do it, whether I smoke it, snort it, slam it, rub it on me, or shove it up my ass like Lenny Bruce did with heroin suppositories. Yeah, you can do it any way you want. There's all kinds of ways with all kinds of substances. It all adds up to addiction. So as long as I don't take it in my body, I'm not going to get loaded, and that's not going to be an issue. In my backpack, go to meetings. The meetings I go to today, what I need is different than early in the program. Arguably, in the beginning, I needed more meetings than I do today. But there's a lot of times that I know I need to be in a meeting. I've not been to one yet where something magical happens, but there is a magic of being at a meeting. When I walk out, I feel better than I walked in. I have a sponsor. I sponsor people, although my experience with sponsorship is not this glorious thing that I hear other people talk about. If you struggle with a sponsor and sponsees, come talk to me. I got stories to tell. So I've been fired as a sponsee. I don't know how that works because I didn't hire them. I didn't ever pay them. They didn't pay me. They didn't hire me. I was reaching out for help. So I don't do that. I try to talk to people. I get a lot of people come around and want to sponsor. I tell them to call me. Nowadays what I do is I don't say we'll do it. I say, you know what? If you're interested in sponsorship, my number one question is, what would you do with a sponsor if you had one? I get very, very few real clear answers. But then I tell them, look, let's start off this way. Let's try it out temporarily. You call me and we'll work on it. And guess what happens with almost all of them? They don't call. I never hear from them again. They stop coming to the meeting where they saw me. I think, my suspicion is so they won't run into me. But I got sponsees. I got a sponsor who's got a sponsor in NA. I work steps, traditions, and I practice the concepts of service. And to make sure I'm doing it, I study the stuff. I have to do it over and over again because even though I've got this fantasy that I'm a smart guy, I'm hard-headed, and repetition makes it work for me. So we're listening to these readings in the beginning of the meeting. Everyone who read, thank you very much. I've heard them for over 17 years. I've actually counted how many times I've probably heard it. You know what? It's still good for me to hear it again. It's still good to hear it again. It helps get through this bone. So, I got this stuff in my backpack. I do steps, do concepts. I work on following practicing traditions in my home group and other groups. I come to meetings on a regular basis. This all is part and parcel of what I do. I'm connected. I've got people in NA that pay attention to what I'm doing in a loving, caring kind of way. It's not like they're the best of buds, but they care about me as an addict. You know what? And if I get out of line, I'm going to hear about it. Jason, there's not a thought in my world that Jason won't jack me if he thinks I'm doing something that's harmful to my own program of recovery. I know this to be true because I've been jacked in a Jason way before. So I tell sponsees, look, don't expect your sponsor to be there every time you pick up the phone. Just because you want to talk to your sponsor's there, number one, to work your steps. If you want to make an appointment to do your steps, fine. What you need, if you're going to be with me in a sponsorship relationship, first of all, you need to get a list of contacts of people in NA that are trying to do what you're doing, and they're going to become the nucleus of your network of recovery. They're going to be your support. And you're going to call them regularly because why? Because I want you in the habit of picking up the phone to talk to them on a regular basis, so when things turn nasty and ugly, you'll be in the habit of calling them. And you're going to call them because they're the fabric of your support network. And then I'm there to work the steps with you. These things all and more, these things and more, are in my backpack of recovery, and it served me well. The literature is important to me. It's in there also, the things that I get out of the literature. But you know what? It's really, in the end, it's all about the magic of recovery in NA happens in these meetings. All the service work that guys like Jason and I, and Trish over there, others of you that do NA service, all that we do in service is really for one purpose. Jimmy K said it best. It is for the purpose of carrying the message of recovery. And that happens, that message is actually given out freely in these meetings. The magic of recovery happens in these meetings. It doesn't happen at picnics. It does, it's supported. It doesn't happen in H&I programs. It doesn't happen on the phone line. It gets supported, but it happens right here. So as I close, thank you very much, because you being here in another meeting of NA is what has saved me. Listening to you share is the basis and the most powerful tool I have that shaped my recovery. I'm here today and I'm clean today principally because you're here and you shared the magic of recovery. I'm an addict named Doug, and I'll keep coming back.